Alden Hawke had lived a quiet life for the past few years, far away from the chaos of intergalactic politics. He had made a home on the human colony on New Epsilon, a world far from the power struggles of Earth and the alien territories. But his peaceful life was about to be shattered. One morning, as he went about his usual routine, the colony's communication system buzzed with an urgent message. The transmission was strange, coming from an unknown source, and the only message that appeared was a single line of text. "She's coming for you." The word sent a chill down Alden's spine. He knew immediately who it referred to: Calera Duran. She was the one person from his past who had haunted his every thought since she disappeared without a trace years ago. Calera, an alien diplomat from the Voralus Empire, had been more than just an ally to Alden. When they worked together on various diplomatic missions, there had been an undeniable connection between them. Their bond had been intense, passionate, and yet unspoken. They had trusted each other, fought side by side, and for a time, Alden had thought there was something more between them. But one day, Calera had simply vanished. She had left without an explanation, without a trace, and without a word. The suddenness of her departure had left Alden with more questions than answers. Now, years later, her name was being spoken again, and the message was clear. She was returning, and she was coming for him. Alden's heart raced as memories flooded back. The first time they met, their long conversations about the future, the moments when their hands brushed in the quiet corners of the colony. He remembered the way she had looked at him, as if she were about to say something important. And then, just as quickly, she had been gone. The pain of her disappearance had left a hole in his heart, and although he had tried to move on, her absence had always lingered in the back of his mind. As the day wore on, Alden couldn't shake the thought of her return. He knew something had happened, something he didn't understand, but he also knew one thing: he needed to find out what. He couldn't let Calera return to this place without answers, without understanding why she had left, and why she was coming back. But there was more to this than just the personal connection. Calera wasn't just a diplomat. She was a key figure in the political landscape between Earth and the Voralus Empire. Her return could signal something much bigger, something that would affect not only his life, but the fate of both worlds. The colony buzzed with activity as news of Calera's ship arriving spread like wildfire. Alden could feel the tension in the air. The Voralus were known for their political games, their secretive nature, and their vast technological superiority. Calera was no exception. She was a woman of power and grace, respected by her people and feared by those who crossed her. But Alden remembered the woman beneath the diplomat's cold exterior. The woman who had shared quiet moments with him, the one who had shown him a side of her no one else had seen. He had never forgotten her, and now, with her ship approaching, he couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and dread. He stood by the window of his quarters, staring out at the stars. The message had come through. Calera was coming back. But why? What had happened all those years ago? What had kept her away? And why, after so long, was she now returning to him? The questions swirled in his mind, unanswered, leaving him restless and uncertain. As the ship entered the atmosphere, Alden made his decision. He would meet her, face her, and demand answers. There was too much at stake, and he couldn't let the past remain in the dark any longer. He couldn't ignore the feeling she had stirred in him all those years ago. The time for waiting was over. The time for answers had arrived. The day Calera's ship finally landed on New Epsilon, Alden stood at the edge of the docking bay, watching the alien vessel descend through the atmosphere. His hands tightened into fists at his sides, his heart beating faster with each passing second. It had been years since he had seen her, but the memories of their time together flooded back as if they had never left. Calera Duran was back, and with her return, everything Alden had carefully built over the years was at risk of falling apart. As the ship's massive doors opened and a soft hiss echoed through the quiet air, Alden felt a lump form in his throat. The familiar silhouette of Calera appeared in the doorway, her long strides purposeful as she made her way toward him. She had changed, of course. Time had that effect. But there was something about her presence that hadn't faded. She still carried herself with the same grace and power that had captivated him all those years ago. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, everything else disappeared. The rest of the world felt like a distant memory. But in those brief seconds, the weight of their shared past came crashing back. Kalera stopped just a few feet away from him, her expression unreadable. There was no smile, no welcoming gesture, just a quiet, intense stare. The air between them was thick with tension, heavy with unsaid words, and Alden could feel the weight of his own emotions pressing on him. She had left without a word all those years ago, leaving him in a void of confusion and heartache. He had tried to forget, tried to move on. But how could he, when the woman who had once been his closest ally, his friend, and something more, had vanished from his life without a trace? Alden took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "Kalera," he said, his voice low but steady, "I didn't expect to see you again." Kalera's eyes softened for just a fraction of a second before her face hardened once more. "I didn't expect you to be here," she replied, her tone flat. "But things have changed, Alden, and there's much I need to explain." He swallowed hard. The words were coming, but the questions piled up in his mind faster than he could process them. Why had she disappeared? Why was she back? And most importantly, what had happened to her in the years since they last spoke? "You left without a word," Alden said, his voice tightening as he spoke, "without any explanation. No message, no nothing. Do you have any idea what that did to me?" Kalera looked away for a moment, her expression shifting, as if she were searching for the right words. Alden could tell that the guilt was there, but so was something else, something deeper, something she wasn't ready to share. She inhaled slowly, then met his gaze again. "I had no choice. My people, there were things I couldn't control. My duties as a diplomat became more complicated than I ever imagined." Alden shook his head, disbelief written all over his face. "And that's it. That's the reason you disappeared from my life without a word. You could have told me something, anything." Kalera closed her eyes, as if the weight of his words hit her harder than she expected. She opened them again, and this time there was a flicker of something, a vulnerability that Alden had never seen in her before. "I was protecting you, Alden," she said softly. "You don't know the things I had to face. The decisions I made were never just about me. They were about ensuring you were safe, even if it meant leaving you behind." For a moment, Alden didn't know what to say. Her words were like a punch to the gut, unexpected and hard to process. He wanted to be angry, to demand more answers, but something in Kalera's eyes, something raw and filled with regret, stopped him. She wasn't the same woman he had known years ago. Something had changed within her, and it wasn't just her appearance. "Safe," Alden repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "You think leaving me was the only way to keep me safe?" Kalera nodded slowly. "It was the only way I knew. My mission. It wasn't something I could explain at the time. But it's over now. I'm back because I need your help, Alden. And I need you to trust me." The words hung in the air between them. Alden didn't know if he could trust her again, but something in his heart told him that despite the years, despite the hurt, he wasn't ready to turn his back on her. Not yet. "Help," Alden repeated, raising an eyebrow. "What's going on, Kalera? What's so important that you came all the way back here to see me?" Kalera took a deep breath and stepped closer. "I'm here to ask for your help, Alden. The peace between our worlds is at risk, and I need you to help me fix it." Alden stood still, trying to process Kalera's words. The mention of peace between their worlds had his mind racing, but the more he thought about it, the more questions began to form. He could feel his pulse quicken as he stared at her, waiting for the rest of the story to unfold. Peace between Earth and the alien races. It had always been a delicate balance, but he never imagined it was at risk in such a way. He wasn't sure what to make of her request, or the way her presence stirred emotions he thought he had buried. You want me to help you fix peace? Alden finally asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. But why me? Why now? After all these years? Kalera took a deep breath and stepped back slightly, as if preparing herself for the weight of the truth she was about to reveal. She looked at him, her expression filled with determination, but there was something else in her eyes, something that suggested the stakes were much higher than either of them could have imagined. I came to you because you're the only one who can help me, she said. The peace talks are about to collapse. There are factions, both human and alien, that are ready to tear everything apart. If we don't act soon, there will be no chance of stopping the war that's coming. Alden frowned, feeling a chill run down his spine. He knew the tensions between Earth and the alien species were high, but he hadn't realized how fragile everything had truly become. He had been so caught up in his own life that he hadn't seen the signs. Now, hearing Kalera speak so urgently, he understood that the world he had once been so involved in was teetering on the edge of destruction. You're telling me there are factions that want to start a war? Alden asked, his voice darkening. Why hasn't anyone done anything about it? Why haven't we heard anything on Earth about this? Kalera shook her head, her eyes flashing with frustration. Because those in power have been keeping it hidden. The tensions have been brewing for years, but no one wanted to face the truth. People on both sides have been manipulating the situation for their own gain, and now it's too late to stop it without someone taking action. Alden's mind raced, and the familiar anger he had once felt toward the political games began to rise. He had been part of the military, part of the system that had once tried to keep peace between their two worlds, but he knew how easily everything could slip into chaos. He had seen it before, and now, it seemed as though that chaos was about to spill over once again. You're asking me to trust you, Alden said slowly, his voice filled with skepticism. After everything that happened between us, after you disappeared without a word. Kalera's gaze softened, and for the first time since their reunion, he saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. Alden, I never wanted to leave you. You have to believe me. What happened? It was complicated. I couldn't explain at the time, but I did it to protect you. To protect both of us. Now, I need your help more than ever. Alden felt a mix of anger and confusion surge within him. How could he believe her after all that had happened? How could he trust someone who had disappeared without a trace? But as he looked at Kalera, something deep inside him stirred, a part of him that still cared for her, a part that still remembered the moments they had shared. He had to admit, as much as he wanted to hate her, there was something about her presence that pulled him back in. I don't know if I can trust you, Kalera, Alden admitted, his voice thick with emotion. But I can't ignore what you're saying. If what you're telling me is true, then the stakes are higher than I ever thought. I'm not sure what role I can play in this, but I won't stand by and let everything fall apart. I'll help you. But you'll have to tell me everything. No more secrets. Kalera nodded, a small but genuine smile breaking through her serious demeanor. I promise, Alden. No more secrets. I'll tell you everything. But we need to act quickly. Time is running out. As the words left her lips, Alden knew that their journey together was far from over. The past might have been full of pain and unanswered questions, but in this moment, they both understood that they had a chance to make things right. The weight of the mission ahead was heavy, but together, they would face it, no matter what challenges lay ahead. Let's get to work then, Alden said, his voice steady as he turned toward the path that lay before them. We've got a lot to do. Alden and Kalera walked side by side through the bustling corridors of New Epsilon's Central Command, the weight of their unspoken words hanging heavily between them. The atmosphere around them felt electric, charged with the knowledge that the fate of two worlds might rest in their hands. They had agreed to work together, but neither of them could escape the tension in the air. The trust they had once shared seemed so far away now, lost to the years that had passed, leaving only questions and the fragile hope of answers. As they approached the command room, Alden's mind buzzed with thoughts of what Kalira had just said. There were factions on both sides, humans and aliens, scheming in the shadows, manipulating events in ways that could destroy everything they had worked for. He had known that peace between Earth and the various alien species was a fragile thing, but hearing the truth from Kalira had put everything into a terrifying new light. It wasn't just politics, it was survival. Inside the command room, the usual officers were present, but the moment Kalira entered, the room seemed to fall into a stunned silence. She was well known, her reputation as a diplomat and leader of the Voralus Empire preceding her, but it was clear that no one expected her to be back so soon, and with a human by her side. Kalira moved to the center of the room, her eyes scanning the faces of the senior officers. "We don't have much time," she said, her voice calm but filled with authority. "The peace talks are a farce. There are factions within both the human and alien governments working against the agreements. I need your full support." Alden stood at the back of the room, watching as Kalira spoke. He could see how commanding she was, how effortlessly she took control of the situation, even though it had been years since they had worked together. Despite his doubts and confusion, Alden couldn't help but feel a deep admiration for her strength. She had always been a woman of conviction, and it was clear now that the stakes were higher than either of them had anticipated. One of the officers, a tall man with sharp features and a cold stare, spoke up. "What are you asking us to do, Kalira? We can't just ignore the protocols set in place. These factions you speak of, are they part of the government? Are we to go against our own people?" Kalira didn't flinch at the officer's challenge. "Yes," she replied firmly. "There are members of the High Council, both human and alien, who are trying to sabotage the peace talks for their own gain. The longer we wait, the harder it will be to stop them. We need to expose them before it's too late." Alden felt the tension rise in the room. It was clear that Kalira's request was not only dangerous, but also deeply political. There were risks involved that no one wanted to acknowledge, but Alden understood one thing. If they didn't act quickly, the fragile peace that had been painstakingly built would collapse, dragging both worlds into war. "What do you need from us?" Alden finally spoke up, his voice cutting through the silence. His question was direct, no hesitation in his words. He wasn't sure if he could trust Kalira completely, but he knew he couldn't stand by and do nothing. Kalira's gaze shifted toward him, a flicker of something soft passing through her eyes before she returned her focus to the group. "I need your networks, your intelligence, and your support. We need to expose the truth before they can do any more damage. If we can get the right information to the right people, we can prevent the collapse of the peace talks. But it has to happen fast. Every minute counts." The officers exchanged uneasy glances, clearly torn between their loyalty to their governments and the growing realization that the situation might be far more dire than they had been led to believe. Alden could sense the hesitation in the room, but Kalira's presence seemed to command a certain respect, even if they didn't fully trust her yet. Kalira didn't hesitate. "I've already made that choice. If it comes to that, I will do what I must. The peace of our worlds is more important than any individual's career or agenda." Her words struck Alden like a thunderbolt. The Kalira he had known would never have spoken so boldly, so resolutely. It was as though the woman standing before him now was someone completely different, someone who had been through unimaginable challenges, someone who had changed in ways he couldn't even begin to understand. But he also realized, as he looked at her, that she wasn't just asking for his help because of their past. She was asking. "We'll do what we can," Alden said, his voice steady. "But we need a plan. We can't just rush in blind." Kalira nodded, her expression hardening once again. "I agree. We'll start by gathering the intel we need. I'll explain everything as we go." Alden had no idea what lay ahead, but he knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. Alden had never imagined he'd find himself in the heart of an alien war zone. As Kalira led him through the dimly lit halls of the command center, Her expression was as determined as ever. But beneath that stoic facade, Alden could sense an undercurrent of anxiety, something she hadn't allowed herself to show before. She had promised him answers, but with each passing minute, the stakes seemed to rise higher and higher. They weren't just playing with the future of two worlds anymore. They were fighting to keep everything from collapsing under their feet. "This is where the real work begins," Kalira said, her voice low but unwavering as she motioned toward the room ahead. "If we want to gather the intel, we need to expose the traitors. We'll need to go deeper into enemy territory." Alden nodded, the weight of her words settling on his shoulders. He had thought that helping Kalira would be straightforward, gathering information, exposing corrupt officials, and maybe stopping a war before it started. But it was clear now that it wasn't that simple. Every step forward was a risk, and each decision could lead them into even greater danger. Inside the room, they were greeted by a small team of operatives, a mix of humans and aliens, each with their own mission and specialized skill. The team worked efficiently, moving from one console to another, scanning for any signs of the factions Kalira had warned them about. Alden's eyes swept across the room, trying to make sense of the web of interconnected data that was being compiled. He felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the true scale of what they were up against. It wasn't just about a few bad actors anymore. It was a network of enemies, working both within their own governments and beyond, that threatened the fragile peace they had fought so hard to maintain. "We've located a few key targets," one of the operatives, a tall alien with golden skin and black eyes, spoke up, interrupting Alden's thoughts. "But the deeper we dig, the more dangerous it gets. We'll need to move fast if we're going to stay ahead of them." Kalira looked at Alden, her expression softening for a moment before hardening once more. "This isn't just a diplomatic mission anymore, Alden. We're walking into a storm. Are you sure you're ready for this?" Alden met her gaze, his jaw tightening as he nodded. "I didn't sign up for peace talks, but I'm here now. I'll do whatever it takes to help." She didn't say anything in response, but the flicker of gratitude in her eyes was enough. Kalira had always been a woman who carried the weight of the world on her shoulders, never letting anyone see how much it cost her. But Alden could tell that she trusted him now, maybe more than she had in the past. The past might have been full of pain, but in this moment, he understood why she had come back for him. They were in this together. The tension in the room thickened as the team continued to sift through the data. Kalira stepped forward, her eyes scanning the information as it appeared on the screen. "We need to get this to the council immediately." "But there's one problem," she said, her voice steady but laced with concern. Alden raised an eyebrow. "What's the problem?" Kalira hesitated for a moment before speaking. "The traitors are inside the council itself. If we expose them directly, they'll bury it. We need to find a way to get this information to the right people without tipping them off." Alden's stomach dropped. He had suspected that the corruption went higher than just a few rogue officials, but hearing it from Kalira made it all the more real. If the very people they were supposed to be working with were part of the conspiracy, there was no telling how deep the corruption ran. "How do we do that?" Alden asked, his voice laced with uncertainty. "If we go public with this, they'll make sure we disappear before we even get a chance to act." "We're going to need a diversion," Kalira said, her eyes narrowing as she formulated a plan. "Something that will draw their attention away long enough for us to leak the information we need. But it won't be easy." Alden nodded, his mind already working through the possibilities. The danger was real, and the risks were enormous. But as he looked at Kalira, he knew there was no turning back now. The next move had to be made carefully, or everything they had fought for would crumble. Kalira gave him a sharp nod, her eyes hardening with resolve. "We're going to need to get to their secure systems, infiltrate their networks, and make sure the right people see what's going on. But first, we'll need to cover our tracks. If they catch on, we'll never get out of here alive." The weight of her words hung in the air as they prepared for the next step. Alden could feel his heart pounding in his chest. The next few hours could determine the fate of both Earth and the alien worlds. It was a race against time, and they couldn't afford to lose. The air in the command center grew thick with tension as Alden and Kalira made their preparations. They had just received the intel they needed, an encrypted message from one of their trusted contacts, detailing a secret meeting among the factions planning to sabotage the peace talks. Time was running out. The information had to be leaked, but to do that, they needed to infiltrate the heart of the enemy's operations without getting caught. Alden felt the weight of the mission pressing down on him. This wasn't a simple operation. It wasn't just about gathering information anymore. It was about changing the course of history. One wrong move, and everything they had worked for could unravel. The fate of two worlds rested on their ability to stay hidden in the shadows and make their move at just the right moment. "We need to get to the central database," Kalira said, her voice low and focused as she glanced at the tactical map displayed on the screen in front of them. "That's where they store all the classified communications between the conspirators. If we can access that, we'll have everything we need to expose them." Alden nodded, his heart racing. The database was located in a heavily guarded facility deep within the heart of the alien capital, a place where only the most trusted officials were allowed. Getting in would require more than just skill. It would take complete precision and timing. "I've been to that facility before," Alden said, his voice steady despite the pressure. "I know the layout, but it's going to be a challenge. The security there is unlike anything I've ever seen." Kalira met his gaze, her expression unwavering. "We don't have a choice. We have to get in. If we fail, everything we've worked for is over. We need those files, Alden." He understood the urgency in her voice. It wasn't just about completing the mission anymore. It was about saving the lives of countless people. The peace talks weren't just a matter of politics. They were a matter of survival. As they finalized their plans, the team gathered around them, each member ready to take on their role in the operation. The tension in the room was palpable, but Alden could sense a quiet determination among them all. They were all in this together, and no matter the danger, they were ready to take the risk. "We have one chance at this," Kalira said, her voice commanding the room's full attention. "Once we infiltrate the facility, we need to move fast. We'll have only a few minutes to access the database before the system detects any unauthorized access. Alden, you're with me. We'll hack into the system and get the data. The rest of you, provide cover." Alden glanced at the team, noting their steely resolve. They were ready for whatever came next. He took a deep breath, mentally preparing himself for what was about to happen. This was more than just a mission. It was the fight for their future. The journey to the facility was tense. The city around them was alive with activity, but as they drew closer to their target, the streets grew quieter, and the atmosphere seemed heavier. It was as though the city itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. Alden could feel the weight of that silence in his bones. They were walking into the lion's den, and they needed to move carefully. As they approached the facility, Alden could see the towering structure looming ahead, its walls lined with high-tech security systems and armed guards. He couldn't help but feel the familiar rush of adrenaline that always came before a high-stakes mission. He had been in situations like this before, but there was something different about this one. This wasn't just about completing a mission. It was about protecting everything they stood for. Kalira motioned for him to follow as they moved toward a small, concealed entrance at the side of the building. The guards were focused on their usual patrols, unaware of the team sneaking past them. Alden's heart pounded in his chest as they slipped through the shadows, each step bringing them closer to their goal. Once inside, Kalira worked quickly, pulling up a schematic of the facility on her wrist device. "The data center is 2 levels down," she said, her voice calm despite the situation. "We'll have to move fast, but if we're careful, we can avoid detection." Alden nodded, glancing around the dimly lit corridors. The walls seemed to close in on them as they moved deeper into the building. Every step felt like a risk, and Alden's mind raced with thoughts of what would happen if they were caught. But Kalira was focused, and he knew that if anyone could pull this off, it was her. They reached the elevator that would take them down to the data center, but as the doors slid open, Alden's heart stopped. "Get down," Kalira shouted as she shoved him to the side, just as the sound of blaster fire rang out from inside the elevator. The mission had just taken a dangerous turn. The elevator doors slammed shut, and Alden's heart pounded in his chest as the sound of blaster fire echoed in the narrow corridor. Kalira had pushed him out of the way just in time, but the sudden attack had left them in a state of shock. Alden scrambled to his feet, his eyes scanning the hallway for any sign of the enemy. There was no time to waste. The mission was at risk. They had to move quickly before the alarm was triggered, but the cold truth had set in. Someone had betrayed them. Kalira's expression was grim, her eyes narrowing as she took in the situation. She quickly pulled Alden behind a pillar, using it as cover. Her voice was steady, but there was a sharpness to it that Alden recognized. She was furious. "Stay low," she ordered. "We can't afford to be seen." Alden nodded, trying to steady his breathing as he crouched down beside her. His mind raced. The operative they had seen in the elevator wasn't supposed to be there. He was one of their own, a trusted member of their team. But now, that trust had been shattered in an instant. The traitor had just fired on them, and it was clear they were walking into a trap. "What the hell happened?" Alden whispered, his voice tight with disbelief. "How did they know we were coming?" Kalira's eyes darkened. "We've been compromised. Someone tipped them off. They must have known our every move." Her words hung heavy in the air, a grim realization settling over Alden. They were up against more than just the corrupt factions now. There was someone inside their own ranks who had been feeding information to the enemy, someone who had betrayed them all. "Do you think it's just him?" Alden asked, his voice low. Kalira's gaze flickered with uncertainty, but she quickly pushed the thought aside. "No time to dwell on it. We need to get to the data center now. The longer we stay here, the more we risk exposing ourselves." Alden nodded, his mind working in overdrive. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him, but he knew Kalira was right. They couldn't let this setback derail their mission. They had to keep moving, or they'd lose everything. The sound of footsteps echoed from the far end of the corridor, growing louder by the second. Kalira signaled for Alden to follow her, and they quickly darted down another hallway, keeping to the shadows. Every step felt like a countdown to disaster. The enemy was closing in on them, and if they didn't act fast, they would be trapped with no way out. Kalira led them to a small maintenance hatch hidden behind a set of utility panels. She worked quickly, pulling out a small device from her belt and attaching it to the panel. Within seconds, the hatch slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a narrow passage leading deeper into the facility. "We take this route," Kalira said, her voice calm but tense. "It'll take us beneath the data center, where we can access the servers without being detected." Alden didn't hesitate. He trusted Kalira with his life, and he knew she wouldn't steer him wrong. Together, they slipped into the passageway, the hatch closing silently behind them. The air in the cramped tunnel was stale, and Alden could hear the faint hum of machinery somewhere in the distance. It felt like they were descending into the belly of the beast, but there was no turning back now. As they moved forward, Alden's thoughts were consumed by the betrayal they had just witnessed. How could someone they had worked with, someone they had trusted, turn on them like this? Who could be behind it? Kalira was their leader, and she had always been fiercely protective of her team. Yet now, even she seemed shaken by the revelation. Alden had seen Kalira face countless dangers in the past, but this felt different. The stakes were higher, and the enemy was closer than they had ever imagined. After what felt like an eternity, they'd reached a small control room beneath the data center. Kalira paused in front of a console, her fingers moving quickly over the interface. "We're almost there," she murmured, her voice tight with concentration. Alden stood watch, his heart racing as he listened for any signs of the enemy. The silence of the tunnel was oppressive, but he knew the calm would not last for long. The traitor would surely alert their superiors soon, and when they did, Alden and Kalira would have only minutes, if not seconds, to act. Then, as if on cue, the sound of approaching footsteps reached their ears. Alden's pulse quickened. The enemy was closing in. "Get the data," Alden urged, his voice urgent. "I'll hold them off." Kalira didn't hesitate. "No, we do this together." As Kalira continued to hack into the system, Alden braced himself for what was to come. The walls seemed to close in on them, and the sound of footsteps grew louder. Whoever had betrayed them was about to learn just how far Alden and Kalira would go to protect everything they believed in. No one, not even the traitor, would stand in their way. The air inside the control room was thick with tension as Kalira's fingers danced across the console, trying to crack the encrypted security system. Alden stood by the door, his pulse racing as he listened for the sound of their pursuers. He could hear footsteps echoing down the hallway, growing louder by the second. They were closing in fast. Time was running out. How much longer? Alden asked, his voice tight with anxiety. Kalira didn't look up from the console. Almost there. Just a few more seconds. The silence between them was deafening. Every second that passed felt like an eternity. Alden could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on him. They were so close to succeeding, but the threat of being caught at any moment gnawed at his nerves. If they failed here, if they didn't get the data, the peace talks, and the lives of countless innocent people would be in jeopardy. Suddenly, the door to the control room burst open, and Alden's heart skipped a beat. 2 armed guards stood in the doorway, blasters raised, their eyes scanning the room for any sign of movement. Alden's hand instinctively went to his sidearm, but before he could draw it, Kalira acted. In one swift motion, she pulled out a small, compact energy grenade from her belt and threw it at the guards. The explosion was deafening, sending a shockwave through the room. The guards were thrown backward, slamming into the walls, their bodies collapsing to the floor in a heap. Alden's heart raced as the sound of the blast echoed in his ears. They had no time to waste. He ran toward Kalira, who was still working furiously at the console. The data was within their reach. He could feel it. "Done," Kalira shouted, her voice a mix of triumph and relief. She slammed her hand down on the console, sending a signal that sent the files they needed to a secure server. It sent, "We've got everything." Alden let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. They had done it. But before he could even process the victory, the sound of more footsteps reached their ears. The enemy was coming. They were surrounded. "We need to move," Alden said urgently, grabbing Kalira's arm and pulling her toward the door. But Kalira hesitated, her eyes narrowing as she looked at the screen one last time. "Something's wrong," she muttered. Her gaze flickered over the data, her mind working quickly. "The files we sent. They don't match what we were looking for." Alden's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" Kalira turned to face him, her eyes filled with disbelief. The data was a setup. This wasn't just about the sabotage. Someone planted false information inside the files we needed. Alden's mind raced. The betrayal had run deeper than they could have ever imagined. "Who did this?" he muttered, his voice cold with fury. "I don't know," Kalira said, her voice tight with frustration. "But someone inside our team has been playing us from the very beginning. They'd been using us as pawns to cover their own tracks." Alden felt a chill run down his spine. The magnitude of the betrayal was almost too much to comprehend. The entire operation, the lives they had risked, all of it had been for nothing. But there was something else, something deeper that made the situation even worse. The sound of heavy boots echoed in the hallway again. They were out of time. Alden reached for his blaster, his mind now focused on survival. The enemy was closing in fast, but Kalira wasn't moving. She was staring at the screen, her face pale with shock. She was searching for something, as if there was a hidden message buried within the false data they had just uncovered. "Stay with me," Alden urged, gripping her arm and pulling her toward the door. "We can sort this out later. We need to get out of here." But Kalira shook her head, her voice shaking. "No, Alden, this can't be right. There's a name here, someone I know." Alden's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? Who?" Kalira's eyes locked onto his, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's Varric." The name hit Alden like a punch to the gut. Varric was the leader of their cover team, the one who had been responsible for assigning missions and overseeing their operations. If Kalira was right, if Varric was the one behind this betrayal, it meant everything they had believed in was a lie. Alden's world seemed to tilt on its axis. Varric had always been the one they trusted above all else. He was the one who had given Alden and Kalira their mission. He was the one who had set the course for the peace talks. And now, to hear that his name was tied to the false data, the sabotage, they were caught in a web of lies, and Varric was at the center of it. Alden nodded, his mind spinning. They had to escape. But the truth of what they had just uncovered would follow them, and the path ahead was no longer clear. They had just uncovered a much darker conspiracy than they could have ever anticipated. Alden and Kalira sprinted through the narrow corridors, their hearts racing as the sound of footsteps grew louder behind them. They had no time to stop, no time to think, only to move. The enemy was closing in fast, and every second was precious. They had uncovered